Hey Legacy community, it's Terra Master, and welcome to the Jinzo format tier list of Speed Duels. The perfect way to close the door, to shut the... I don't even know what I was going to say there. I had two analogies in mind, I promise. I was going to say close the book and shut the door, but I said close the door. I'm an idiot. Anyway, the perfect way to end the Jinzo format of Speed Duels. And with me, as you may have heard right there, is Curseof YGO. What's up?
Not much, man. I'm very excited to close the door on this extremely overextended format.
Yeah, the format that's lasted way too long. Jinzo did spice it up for maybe a month, but then it was like, same old, which we'll talk about. So,
indeed.
Let's talk about our first deck here. Yeah, we're going to start with this little Apprentice Magician picture here. Now, for those of you that may not know, an Apprentice stall deck, shout out to Goblin of Greed or Giant Spain, actually finished first place in the most recent Speed Duel League winner box. So that's why we're going to talk about this first, as it is the most recent first place finish. And I think me and you both agree, although after some debate, that it should be placed in tier 2.
Yes, most definitely. It has just way too many tops for it to be put any lower at all. It has top 4 results from SDL Killa, along with top 8 results from him as well. First place from Goblin of Greed. It's just been showing up constantly, man.
Yeah, and Paulo used a version of it as well. So a lot of good players have used some kind of stall deck in this format and have performed well consistently. So there's no reason to put it below tier 2. And I mean, as far as how the deck works, it's pretty much just Apprentice is your floater. You have things like New Doria and Old Vindictive Magician, which obviously Old Vindictive comes from Apprentice Magician, and then those are your monster removal. You obviously run your burn traps. You Twisted Personality is your skill. You run Golden Ladybug to be very, very annoying. I'll actually put a sample deck up because, as I don't want to go through every single card, but you get it. You run your hand traps. You survive. You be very annoying. You make the game last an hour, and then you win.
Exactly. Like, you have 2 win conditions. Either you burn your opponent to death or you completely deck them out. In fact, the only loss that Goblin of Greed got in Speed Duel League's tournament using his stall deck was against another stall deck with 1 more card in the main deck than his. And he only lost because they had that 1 extra card and decked him out first.
Yeah, see, so if you were to go by just that, stall would be tier 0. You only ever lose in the mirror. Anyway, let's not talk about tier 0 formats and bring back memories of trials. Let's move on to a deck that actually we had a big part in creating, which is Viral Despair. And as much as we are personally biased towards this deck, I think it's got to go into Rogue.
Yeah, 100% there. It definitely has to hit the rogue category. It is a fantastic strategy, but it only has 1 truly good matchup, which is against the Conflict deck, which is the very next deck we're going to talk about here. And beyond that, everything else is definitely like a toss-up, especially Moth. Moth just isn't a great matchup, but it's okay because Moth isn't showing up as often as it used to. Along with that, the more prevalent the deck gets, the weaker it gets because people start siding DD Crow. Oh no.
Yep, so I mean, it's only a good deck for the 1 matchup, like you said. It's an anti-meta deck. It's why specifically we created it, so that you have your Haunted Shrine, which is the picture used to represent it here, that activates in the graveyard, so it doesn't care about Jinzo, and it's supposed to bring back either your Zombina to loop into something else, or bring back your Despair from the dark to be a big booty that Jinzo can't get over. And since Jinzo is the boss monster of Conflict, it's supposed to be literally programmed to beat Conflict and nothing else. And sadly, that's exactly how we've seen it go, and that it really has trouble with a lot of other decks.
Yeah, exactly. Against that Conflict deck, you mill all their offerings. Their only out is the skill, and once the skill is burned, you just have either a 3000 booty or a Gentlemander lock, and they just can't do anything about it, and you deck them out. But versus Moth, I mean, Moth is bigger than a 3000 booty. Stall and just burned is just brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's not really much, like we tried to build a side deck specifically for that. I'm actually going to go ahead and put a link in the cards right now to the deck profile in case you're interested. But
show me the spice.
Yep, Show Me the Spice, episode 2. Now I know the format is almost over, but hey, maybe you want to beat up on Conflict for the last couple weeks here. Anyway, let's talk about Conflict since we've already kind of talked about it so much. Now this, in my mind, is no doubt the best deck of the format, and we're going to put it in tier 1.
For sure. OTK, consistently, that's all you need. That's enough. Enough said.
Yep, that's all you need. It's very, very simple, brain-dead Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you always open Change of Heart. So you just set a monster, you pass turn, you go and you get your next turn, you activate Change of Heart, you take their monster, you summon that trap card Floodgator, which is Jinzo, and Jinzo plus your other monster is enough to win in 4,000 Yu-Gi-Oh! That's all it takes.
We have a format where you are required to run Offerings and Sphere Karibo, so you don't just lose to this deck.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing, I'm going to show you the optimized Lucas Gaylord version of this deck, and he actually main decks, you can see Sphere Karibo and Offerings, just because this deck, the biggest threat to this deck is the mirror match. So you have to kind of not only make your deck to OTK everything else, you also have to make it so that you don't get OTK'd by your opponent playing Conflict as well.
Exactly. You gotta have answers for the mirror so you can manage to win.
Yep. Luckily, it's not like oppressive enough to be tier 0, but it's still no doubt the best deck of the format.
Yeah, and exactly where it struggles most entirely is the fact that if you can out there Jinzo and have a follow-up, then it becomes just like a regular game, and they're not just overpowering you with like a constant skill like Twisted Personality does, for example. Right.
Yep. All right, now we're going to actually hop from meta to anti-meta again, as this Jinzo here actually represents Spellproof Armor. And the reason we went with Jinzo for Spellproof Armor is because before Jinzo, Spellproof Armor was not even worth talking about on a tier list like this. So we're going to put it in Rogue.
Yes, for sure. For sure. It is the anti-Moth deck of the format, but in, I guess, the opposite of Viral, it counters Moth, loses to Conflict, while Viral counters Conflict and loses to Moth, so...
Yep. So unfortunately, there's no way to combine these two decks together to make spellproof zombies. Although that would be amazing.
That would be amazing, man.
Yeah. So just when me and you both actually started playing Spellproof Armor a lot and had some success against Mott decks, people realized hey, Conflict Jinzo was actually the best deck of this format, and down we went.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the deck that it counters, I like the pattern we're going in here, that we're going to talk about Moth. Now, Moth is nowhere near as annoying as it has been in the past in Speed Duels, so congratulations guys, we've power crept Moth. And we've actually moved it down to tier 2.
Congratulations, you made a more broken deck.
Yep, because there's only 2 options when a deck gets that good. You either have to power creep it, or you have to have a ban list. And I guess we went with, let's just give them Change of Heart. Anyway, Moth is still Moth, and this is combined, rather than talk about both decks, we're talking about Warrior Moth, as well as Dark Moth. So you have your more consistent Parasite draw, more often Allure of Darkness version of Moth, which dominated the pre-Jinzo format, and then you also have your Warrior, more aggressive, has bigger beaters, gives you more of a chance, in my opinion, against something like Conflict, that kind of Moth. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, the Warrior variant is definitely the appropriate variant for this format, just so you do have a follow-up beyond your Moth play.
Yep. And I actually thought about whether or not Mott should get ahead of Conflict, but not Conflict, no way. Whether or not Mott should get ahead of Apprentice Stall. However, considering it has not got a first place finish in a major tournament since Jinzo came out, I'm going to say no.
Yeah, and like, I feel like you could argue for Warrior Moth being ahead of Apprentice Stall, but I don't think you can argue for Dark Moth at all.
Right, yeah, so that's why it just makes sense to leave it behind it for right now.
Exactly.
Speaking of behind it, we're going to actually squeeze this next deck here, which is Relinquished. And we're going to put in Rogue, but I want you to tell me whether we should put it behind Spellproof or between Spellproof and Viral.
Alright, so the thing is that Relinquish can genuinely move around amongst these three decks down here in Rogue, and they can all move around a lot depending on what deck is being used most prevalently at the time. If you guys seen the results of the last Speed Duel Win-A-Box, you'll have seen that there was only 3 Moth decks. Because of that, Spellproof Armor hits the end of the list.
Exactly. And because Conflict is the strongest deck, the anti-Conflict deck, in my opinion, is the top Rogue strategy.
Yes, for sure.
Anyway, so we're going to have Relinquished squeezed in the middle here of our 2 other Rogue decks, because it's not quite as Conflict countering. It's not Conflict countering at all, in fact, it dies to Conflict. It has...
You need to have the perfect opening hand with Summon Relinquished, Tribute Relinquished for Faceless, and then let them take your Faceless to survive the Conflict play, which is not okay.
No, definitely not. There's always the play of just stand there and do nothing, but then you get hit for 1600, 1800, or even 1900. So that really doesn't do anything to help you out. But Relinquished is Relinquished. You play your Faceless loop. You try to give him the good suck. If you can't, then you lose. Sometimes you can, and you still lose. So that's just Relinquished, guys. Unfortunately, it never quite got to top tier status in Speed Duels. It was like decent for a time, and honestly, I thought that having this skill, Thousand Eye Spell, would actually make it okay, but it shows you how much you can really predict before the format actually works itself out, which is not much, because a lot of people thought the Relinquished loop was going to make it a dangerous deck. Turns out it's just annoying to play against, but it's not exactly dangerous.
Yeah, it's very frustrating, and for anyone who's playing Relinquished, in my personal opinion, and I think Terramaster would probably agree, the best way to play Relinquished is the stall variant. You really can't go aggro with this deck, especially with all the back row hate that exists in the current format, and because of that, why stall with a Relinquished deck when you can stall with the Apprentice deck?
Yes. Why stall with the Relinquished deck when you can just stall with the stall deck?
Exactly.
Also, when you think about it, Viral Despair also kind of stalls, because I won a lot of my games against Conflict by deck out.
Yes, for sure. Deck out is a very, very viable strategy for Viral. I don't consider it stall as much because it goes by a lot faster. It's still stall, but it just doesn't feel as bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's not stall, it's more mill, right? You are actively burning cards from your opponent's deck, rather than Relinquish, which is you just summon a Relinquished, or maybe even a Thousand Eyes Restrict, and you just stand there. So yes. It's definitely the most stall of the stall decks, where like you're not even activating Twisted Personality like you are with Apprentice Stall. Like, you're not even burning them, you're literally just standing there.
You just sit there and loop.
Yep.
Summon Restrict.
You just sit there. Yeah. And if you're playing against it, you just sit there and hope to draw double offerings and then have an attack left after that. So it's honestly, I don't think Relinquished is a fun experience for either player, but nope. Then again, that's enough talking about that deck. Let's move on to the final deck we're going to talk about here, and this deck has also had a first place finish. Shout out to Danique, Card Game Philosopher, and this is Twisted Warrior. When I say first place finish, I mean in Speed Duel League, since those are the biggest tournaments. I'm just talking about that primarily.
Yeah, it has had a few first place finishes throughout the format, though, from other players like Art.
Yes.
And there was another one in Legacy, but I can't remember who it was.
No, I don't either, but I will say thank you for that. Shout out to Art, because he is the first person I actually saw who played this deck. I didn't even know that the deck existed before that, so yeah, that's pretty cool. And now that I think about it, I do believe it might have been Jimin who got first place with
yes,
Legacy.
I think you're right.
Yeah, all right. See, I know my player base. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to put this actually in the middle of tier 2. Let me know if you agree.
I would put it above Stall.
Oh, okay. So you're putting it... Okay, I can agree with that. I'm going to put it on top of tier 2, yes, because you're right. Because it's had more consistent top finishes, more finals, more first place finishes as well. So
yes, exactly. It has like multiple wins. It's topped almost every single event. And the thing with Stall was you usually see 1, maybe 2 Stall decks reach the top cut. But with Twisted, you've seen like 4, 5. You've always seen them at like multiples in the top cut. So it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And then think about the fact that compare this to Conflict and to Moth and the other 2 of the 3 other top decks, in that it's a control deck, right? So Conflict and Moth will want to OTK you more often than not, whereas Twisted Warriors will want to slowly whittle down your resources, and then with their big monsters whittle down your life points. And in addition to that, they also have burn damage, so they also have the burn traps, and they'll also have Twisted Personality as well. So it's really like a slow, steady death playing against it.
Exactly. And that's where this deck has certain ways where it's better than things like Conflict and Moth, because they're like a one-trick pony. It's like that one play, you try to win, and then after that you're playing an honest game of Yu-Gi-Oh! But with Twisted Personality, that skill is always there. Your opponent is constantly trying to play around, giving you counters. You're trying to generate more counters, and you can keep on slowly gaining more advantage over them by discarding and popping their cards.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And then going back on that, you look at the top 4 decks of this format, and there's 2 core strategies here, right? There is OTK your opponent as fast as possible, and then there's slowly kill them, and there's 2 ways to do that. Whether that's you want to use big monsters to slowly kill them to support your burn and your skill, or whether that's you want to use stall cards to slowly kill them.
Exactly, and both are extremely viable. Actually, I will say the Warrior deck tends to actually win more and do really, really well versus the Stall deck. But if you guys watch Speed Duel League's video, by the way, you guys should really check out Speed Duel League, especially his latest video. Fantastic stuff.
Oh yeah, that's true. Anyway, I'll actually link it in the description, because that's like an amazing video for anybody who wants to get into Speed Duels. And I mean, even if you aren't, it's just cool to watch how this game has evolved.
For sure. But yeah, if you guys did watch his the Winnabox number 3 breakdown, you guys will have seen that Goblin of Greed played Despair from the Dark in the side deck to counter the discard effect of Twisted Personality, and just having that really big body to beat down the Warrior decks actually won him games. Right,
because the Warrior decks depend on especially their charging Gaia to be like the ace that only your Cocoon or your Inner Conflict can get rid of. So once you tell them, nope, I am also a Twisted Personality deck and I have a 2800 beater, they're like, what?
Yes. Excuse me?
So that's what side decking is, though, right? In a perfect Yu-Gi-Oh format, side decking is that element of surprise that you're like, whoa, right? And he who side decks best deserves to win that particular match. So.
Amen.
So yeah, that's the deck. That's the format. Hopefully, when we do this for the Battle City box for the first time, we'll have more than 7 different decks to talk about, because I know that's what I want, and I know that's what you want as well.
Yes, for sure.
Yep. The more decks, the better. Although some people would get angry that they don't know what they're going to go against in a tournament, but hey, that's the fun. That's what Yu-Gi-Oh is supposed to be. For all of you who've ever played a diverse Yu-Gi-Oh format, whether there was some TCG format that you played that had, 5, 6, 7, 8 viable decks, or if you're playing Duel Links right now, where if you go on the ladder, almost every single match you run into a different deck. Like, sure, there'll be some that are like the top decks that you run into more often than not, but there's the chance that you'll run into a lot more decks, and you could actually lose to one of those unexpected decks. So that's what Yu-Gi-Oh should be, and that's what I'm hoping it will be, with a 200 card boost to the card pool.
Yes, and I will mention one more thing that you wanted to talk about, just going to remind you about it. You wanted to mention the fact that we have yet to have a tier 3 deck in ages.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with Speed Duels, is that a lot of our formats, especially recently, when you go back to ever since Nightmare Sonic Blast came out, has been one deck on top on its own, and there are a couple decks maybe that can like kind of compete with it sometimes and sneak in a win every now and then, but then there's nothing below that, because that one deck on top is so powerful. A lot of other things that, like viral, right, that we would like, that it would be cool to see it actually be competitive, it just can't, because viral, while it specifically counters that one deck, you have to go in so hard on countering that one deck that it can't do well against anything else, right? So, and anything else, like Relinquished or Spellproof, that one deck just completely annihilates it. So, that's been a really big problem with Speed Duel so far, and I really, really hope that we get to a point where we can solve that, and we have not only more than one deck in Tier 1, but we also have a healthy Tier 2 and 3.
Yes, for sure. And no more stall.
Yeah, and no more stall. We've had enough stall. We've had enough burn. Like, I mean, I was one of these idiots who always wondered, like, I wonder what Yu-Gi-Oh would be like if there was a format where burn was actually a viable strategy. Well, I'm sorry I ever asked, because it's not fun. Anyway, guys, you got any closing comments?
Nah, man, I'm all good here.
All right, guys. That's all we got for you. Hopefully, when we see you next time for a tier list video, it will be a lot more exciting. Not to say that this isn't exciting. I'm sure it is for a lot of you. So, Curseof and Terra Master out.